All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Celine Coggins. I'm the Executive Director of Grantmakers for Education, and I'm really excited to have this event today. So we're here to talk about a report that we just put out based on survey results that came from many of you. We're calling it the Big Vision for the Next Stage of Education Philanthropy. So a little bit of context. As all of you know, we have a lot going on right now in society and education. We are in the middle of a public health crisis. We are in the middle of an economic crisis. We are in the middle of a racial justice crisis. And we have just turned the page from one presidential administration to the next. In all of that crisis, there is opportunity. And so as we started to do this work, what we were thinking about was, how do we help philanthropy to be out ahead? One of the core values that GFE strives to kind of enact is being future facing. And one of the most important roles that philanthropy can play is as a catalyst, moving us into the future, helping us to think clearly about what's to come. I was on a call this morning with a school principal, and asked questions about how are you thinking about the future? And the answer, I think, from most school leaders right now is we can't. We're in triage mode. We're running two different types of schools at once, one that has some in-person learning and one that is all remote. This is all brand new to us. And so, those school leaders, those educators need help making sure that we're serving students now, and also thinking toward a future where we don't just revert back to the way things were several years ago, and we don't just continue in crisis mode. So the role of philanthropy right now is ever more urgent, and we at GFE see ourselves as having a really important role in trying to pick up on trends, trying to make sense of what's happening across a really quickly changing field, and help you to kind of get grounded in what are other organizations like yours doing and thinking. So that's what this is all about today. Really excited to have you join us. I have said in the past, and I will say again, all of the work that I do is rooted in two things. I started my career as a teacher, and so I always think to the lens of what's happening in the classroom. And I also, came out of my PhD and was a research director at a think tank. So I absolutely love doing work like this. I was deeply involved in the question creation. It really emerged from my ongoing conversations with members about what's interesting to them. I was deeply, deeply involved in the analysis and the writing. And so, so I've been living and breathing this report. I think it's profoundly important for the field. I'm going to conclude my comments in a little while with just my analysis of what's exciting about this, what to me is a little heartbreaking about this, and what's surprising. And I really would love to hear that from you. For those of you who have participated in GFE events like this in the past, you probably know it's extremely rare for me to do a solo act. I don't think I've ever done one before, but we've got a lot of data. I want to have some time for sense making with you all. And this is going to really build to our agenda in the coming year. And so I see this as just the jumping off point where we're going to be doing lots more work together coming out of these results over the course of 2021. The one thing I also want to note, this is a mostly member conversation. We have invited a couple of members of the media, so just be aware of that. I don't think this will be the most controversial conversation we'll ever have. Maybe those are coming down the line. Okay, so with that, I am going to share my screen and pull us into the data. Let's see. Okay, great. And I do encourage you to put questions in the chat. I may get to them over the course of while we're talking, or I may save them for the end, but really, really interested to hear what people are thinking. Okay, so here we are, big vision for the next stage of education philanthropy. So what we're gonna do is go through kind of 5 parts of today. Number 1 is the big picture. Number 2 is talking about the path to action. So as I said, we were really intentional in trying to set up a set of questions that allowed us to build a future agenda for GFE that really serves the interests of members from what you tell us in the survey. So we've been very intentional in kind of grouping things and thinking through, where would you go from here if this is the way people are thinking? Where would you go from here if people are thinking differently on this issue? We're going to talk by theme, because we know that some of you are really focused on K-12. Some of you are really focused on post-secondary. Some of you are focused on issues within. And so we want to make sure that you get what you need in those themes. I'll share my analysis, and then we'll have time for questions and comments. Honestly, this is the first time I'm doing this kind of the full way. So I don't know how long it's going to take. We'll see. All right. So big picture, this is just going to be kind of some of the overarching data that is really going to kind of drive us forward. So we asked questions in 5 themes. For those of you who attended our conference week in October, you would see that these themes corresponded to the 5 days of our event. So we had plenary speakers, we had all sorts of deep dive workshops and things like that were focused on these 5 issues. We know these 5 issues matter deeply to our members. We had civics and civic education, really focused on students. That's a piece that is very much front and center this year. We had, what's the role of philanthropy in an inequitable system? So really big picture, the changing role of philanthropy, the pressure philanthropy is under. And then we had a set of issues very focused. So post-secondary and workforce success, pre-K through 12, and then racial justice in education. So for each of those, we asked questions about the themes themselves, and then we asked questions about subtopics within each and kind of what are the strategies that we think are most important going forward. All right, and then what we did was we knew that there were a few different ways that we should tackle these questions. So we asked for each of these topics and subtopics. Number one, let's think about urgency. So is this a topic area that has become more or less urgent in the current environment? So we really want to see what people are feeling in this moment, in this crisis, what's really rising to the top in terms of things that we need to address. But we know separately, funders look for opportunities for real system change. We know there are windows of opportunity that exist for different issues at different times. And so we asked this question of, is there an opportunity for systemic change at this particular moment? And then finally, we asked about the role of philanthropy. So is philanthropy going to be a difference maker on this issue in making sure that people get what they need, that schools get, schools are improving, that schools are sustaining themselves? And so we asked that question. And then after we asked on all these different topics to rate your feelings on those 3 topics, we said, here's the whole list. What should be philanthropy's first priority, second priority, and third priority, both in terms of thematic work and also in terms of the details? So we're going to get to all of that. Who responded? So we had about 30% private foundations, 27 family foundations. We had a bunch of community and independent foundations. So a real mix. Really interesting. We asked the question of how long have you worked in philanthropy? About half of our respondents have been in philanthropy for more than 10 years, and about half have been in for less than 10 years. So for us, that's a pretty interesting kind of cross section. We're really getting kind of, who exists in philanthropy. We had just over 100 survey responses. So the first finding, and I don't think this will be a surprise to everyone, but I think it's really important to note, and it came out in a really profound and emphatic way, is that for those of you in philanthropy right now, everything feels more urgent. So we had 41 different issue areas that we asked the question of what feels more urgent, what feels very urgent in this moment. And there were only two of all of those issue areas that more than half of respondents didn't say either this feels extremely urgent right now or it feels more urgent than it did before the pandemic. So that's pretty profound. So if you're feeling stress, if you're heading into the holidays needing a vacation, you are not alone. Then next we asked this question about opportunity. On opportunity, people were much more measured. So in this case, there were only 6 issue areas of all of the 41 where more than half of people said there was a strong opportunity for systemic level change. So these are really important. These are the places where people see a window of opportunity. So at the K-12 level, it's everything that has to do with improving remote and hybrid learning. At the foundation level, interestingly, it's about shifting strategy to include or expand explicit goals around racial justice. Not surprisingly, we see an opportunity in the space around social and emotional and trauma-informed supports for students. Obviously, we know that's front and center right now. Improvements to online learning at the post-secondary level. So you'll see we have a little key here, and these were kind of, you see the categories that some of these came into. Social justice movement building beyond education, like Black Lives Matter, really important to our members right now. And then cultural awareness and implicit bias training for educators. So these are the places where people see some window of opportunity. And then another interesting one is, and this corresponds with the urgency, but we've got some nuance coming later. Those of us in philanthropy think philanthropy is more needed than ever. So 78% say across all issues that philanthropy is going to be highly essential, or at least essential, to really moving the needle as we move into the next era. That's probably not surprising. What is surprising is coming later. So we also ask the question, so is philanthropy needed? Or on the other side of the spectrum, could philanthropy do harm? We know that there are kind of societal feelings about philanthropy right now, especially big philanthropy, new philanthropy. And so this question of, are there issues where philanthropy should stay out? We asked that question and we got some really concrete answers. So those are coming later. And so then when we looked at those major themes, so civic and student education, philanthropy, K-12, post-secondary, and racial justice in education, really clear theme emerged. Anyone want to guess in the chat? All right, I don't see anyone in the chat just yet, but that's fine. All right, well, okay, yes, so improving remote learning, yep. All right, so let's see, racial justice and education, yep. All right, so in terms of the big themes, only 5% said the most important thing to focus on over the next 1 to 3 years is the future of civic education and students. Only 14% said the most important thing to focus on is the future of philanthropy. 17% said the future of, oh, I love that we're getting some answers in here, post-secondary and workforce success. And even those of you who are guessing and are guessing in the tighter categories, I don't expect you to know everything about the structure of the report. You are on the right track. I see a lot of on the right tracks. K-12, pre-K through 12 was about a quarter of our respondents, but the very clear winner in terms of major themes was racial justice. So 39% of our members said if there was one big theme for GFE to focus on, for the field to focus on, it's racial justice in education. So that was a slam dunk in terms of the way the data read. So then we asked this question of the 41 different categories, and you'll have access to the report, and the report will show you all of these different categories. We'll get into them in different ways over the course of this talk. A priority that's very central to racial justice came up as number 1. So of these 41 issues, what is the most important thing education philanthropy should be focusing on? Resource equity. So focusing on making sure that I'm very motivated. I feel like my North Star in this work is the Ed Build work that shows that that we spend $23 billion more on schools that are majority white than schools that are majority Black and brown every year. So if we're going to address racial justice, if we're going to fix education, this is a central problem that members of our audience see. Next, and again, this is what we did here to get to this list, is everyone had the 41 categories that already responded as to whether they're urgent, whether there's an opportunity, all that kind of thing. And then we said, here's the 41. What would be your number 1? What would be your number 2? And what would be your number 3? And then we just did a weighted average. So these are the ones that really came to the top, that a lot of people put as their number 1. So SEL comes next, improving remote learning comes third, educator workforce, diversity of the educator workforce, and then supporting students to reduce time to degree at the post-secondary level. So those were the things that just, when you ask people of all these different categories, what would you put as number one? And this is what you see. Another thing we asked then is, okay, so we're at this big important moment. We're thinking toward the future. What are we going to need to do to move the agenda that we've put forth? What are we going to need to do to move these issues? And we see a really strong bench toward policy. So 77% either say policy should be a primary strategy or should be mixed in with programmatic strategies. So important to know. And then we also asked the question, if you're going to move on this vision, is there alignment within your foundation? And so I want to just kind of take a side note here for a moment to say that when we constructed this survey, we said we want to ask individuals because we believe that individuals within foundations, their perspectives and opinions are going to be kind of a leading indicator toward change. We have in the past in our benchmarking report asked the lagging indicator question. How much of your organization's budget has been allocated to this issue or that? So we know that first it's people's opinions. Second, it's that kind of coherence building within the foundation. Third, it's allocating budget and strategy. And then it'll show up in our benchmarking report. We couldn't wait on this. And so we asked, do you feel like the people that you're making decisions with now are aligned to what you are saying is important? We found in the case of team members that it's about 70, I can't do math and talk at the same time. It's about 71%, it's about 59% in terms of agreement with trustees and other members of leadership. Okay. So let me pause and you can either unmute yourself or throw in the chat, but any questions on that kind of overall description of where we are? Okay. All right, so now I'm going to talk about what we tried to do is create, let's see, I've got a question. What was the number of member participants? So it was 101, I think 101 or 102 that participated in the survey. So just over 100, which makes it pretty easy for analysis purposes, but larger than a lot of surveys that we've done. Let's see. So, right, so now what we tried to do was say, okay, so we've got a whole bunch of different data. How many total members does GFE have? 275 or so. So now what we tried to do is say, okay, within these different pieces of information that we've got, how do we make sense of them in terms of building an agenda going forward? And so what we did was we looked across the urgency, opportunity, and role for philanthropy questions and tried to make sense of what we were seeing in terms of patterns. So the first pattern that I want to, and then what we did for each of those was that here's the
students and adult learners.
I think someone went off mute. There we go. So the first category that I want to share is what we call the trifecta. So these are the 5 issues where urgency was incredibly high, off the charts relative to everything else. Opportunity, this opportunity for systemic change was very high. And then people saw a really strong role for philanthropy. So I want to note that 2 of the top 3 are around remote learning. So this question of at the K-12 level, and again, you'll see the designations that are a little confusing if we're moving fast. That first one was in the K-12 category. So improving remote learning and everything related to remote learning, from improving broadband and access and teacher training. Then I will get to that question about how is racial justice defined. What I'm going to say as we get to the next stage, you'll see the different categories that we asked around that question. our intent was to try to say, here are some different issues GFE and other members are kind of working on and could be working on more intensively, which ones really rise to the highest level. So we'll see that in the next section. So another that really kind of hits this trifecta is SEL issues. Another is, and we saw this as kind of the #1 rated priority, addressing resource equity. And then the last one was social justice movement building beyond education. So for us at GFE, this says, these are really the places for bold collective action by our members, where members are ready to act, are already acting, could be acting more in concert. For me, noticing that 2 of them have to do with essentially the future of hybrid learning is really instructive when I think about, where do we go? How do we support members? All right, so I'm going to move on to the next. Okay, so then I'm going to move to the opportunity zone. So the opportunity zone are the ones that fall kind of just beneath the trifecta. These are ones where what we saw in terms of opportunity was generally pretty optimistic. But so this might be a moment for these issues, but what we saw in terms of urgency was really mixed. So, some people would list this as their #1. Some people would say this is, far less urgent to me. I was on a panel with Pedro Noguera the other day, and he was talking about implicit bias training and cultural awareness training. And what he said was, I'm a skeptic of it in a lot of cases. It has a lot of potential to be done not well. And so, so I think that gets reflected in, when we get to an average on that, in terms of people's sense of urgency, we've got a lot of people saying this is really urgent to tackle. Another group saying less urgent to tackle, and it's our job to kind of unpack those things. Another right in that group is diversifying the educator workforce. Birth to 5 comes into this category. Workforce development and CTE comes into this category. And then alternative disciplinary practices at the K-12 level. So all of those are areas where if you are a funder and these are your key issues, you should be doing some case making. You should be trying, moving this issue from, feeling less urgent to some people toward a tipping point. It's not quite there, but there is some opportunity for progress. Then we found a set, and these were, this was interesting to me because it really, really tracks well with what I understand of our membership. So there are a set of issues where members would say philanthropy is really needed. It's no more urgent than it's ever been, but it's really important. And maybe we're not going to be able to do major systems change in this moment, but I feel like this issue is no less important. So we know at GFE, we have a tremendous number of members who are just really strong supporters in the post-secondary space. We have 3 in this category that fall into the post-secondary space. So access for historically marginalized students, supporting degree completion, and transitions between high school and post-secondary. All of those are things where, basically the message is steady as you go. People want to stay with these issues. They are strong issues within our membership. Another that GFE, spends a lot of time on, and we have tons of member enthusiasm around, is out of school time. So this is one, people are saying no more urgent than before the pandemic in some ways. I think some would say it is, but it's one where we just need, we see a huge role for philanthropy, and we're going to stick with it. And then the last one here is systems alignment. This is something I hear a lot about these days. It's something where urgency is fairly mixed. All right. Then we go to the stretch goals. So these are a place where these ones are really fascinating to me. So these are the ones where urgency is really high among our members, but they seem really hard. Most of these are big policy problems that are going to take a lot to tackle. It seems like folks recognize the need to do this, but are not quite yet sure of the entry points. So basic needs, so food and shelter needs and things like that related to low-income college students. supporting major tax reform aimed at addressing income and wealth inequality, something that is huge, has huge implications for our sector. But we're in the earlier stages on this, see some urgency, but are not sure where to go. Increasing government funding overall, college affordability and financial aid, and protecting immigrant and undocumented students. So as we think about that from the perspective of GFE, we say, these are the places where we're probably building a learning, not an action agenda, where we are, helping members to look for entry points, but recognizing that these are probably at an early stage. These are big things to tackle, and we're not quite ready to kind of jump right in with clarity yet. All right. And then the final composite category. These are the proceed with cautions. So I mentioned earlier that we had, that when we asked about the role of philanthropy, we asked, is philanthropy needed? But also, could philanthropy do harm? In all of these, we saw more than 12, all the way up to 33% of members saying, these are places where philanthropy might do harm. They also corresponded pretty closely to areas where we didn't see high levels of opportunity. So school choice, redefining success and accountability in K-12, renewed desegregation efforts. We know those are happening in government funded in cities and states around the country. It's a place where philanthropy is cautious. Supporting reparations for communities that have been exploited historically, another place where philanthropy appears cautious. Teaching US history and social studies curriculum revisions to include historically marginalized voices, and teacher equality. On each of these, I want to note, and I'm going to say more about these later in the talk, there are large numbers of members who say, yes, we like these things, we want to work on these things, but a remarkably large number, when you think about it, saying, whoa, there are some things we should think about here. So in my mind, these generally fall into two buckets. One are pieces of a education reform agenda that has existed for quite a while, was certainly prominent in the Obama administration. So school choice, accountability, teacher quality, these were some of the pillars of an academically focused education reform agenda. It was one that I was very much part of. I'll say more about that later. And so, so I think really important to try to dissect some of the lessons that are leading large numbers of members or decent numbers of members to say we should not even be in this space at all in philanthropy. And then the other set of categories are really related to some big boulders in racial justice. So desegregation and reparations. So I think there's something there also to unpack and think about why do we have differences among our members in their perspectives on whether we should be acting in these areas or not. So teacher quality was asked, so we have a question about what are the characteristics that constitute teacher quality. Teacher quality was asked just like that. So, of the K-12 issues you could focus on, is one that you think philanthropy should be focusing on, teacher quality. So we pick it up in different ways, like diversifying the educator workforce and implicit bias training at other parts in the survey. And so those came up as more areas of interest for more of our members. But yes, in surveys, we're always left a little bit dissatisfied by the limitations of the question. Okay, quick run through of highlights by theme. And again, this is all for, for members to be situating themselves, for us to be thinking about how we best serve you. What do you mean by these topics when we think about what's most important to you? So first, in terms of, and we tried to make this easy enough, I just want to kind of point out the highs and the lows. So, so the first category you're going to see each time is about philanthropy, and what percentage of members consider this philanthropy highly essential. The next category is about opportunity. Did most see it as a strong opportunity for systemic change? And then last is urgency. So what we see is social justice movement building really kind of rises to the top of the civic education category. And then interestingly, because it's its own form of movement, student voice in school and education policy is the area where there is kind of the least enthusiasm among members. So this is our way of kind of inductively saying, okay, if we're talking about civic education, what are we talking about that's really pressing and of concern to GFE members? So next, when we get to K-12 improvement, what you see is, somewhat of a reflection of what I've been talking about. So hybrid learning, SEL, birth to 5, those really rise. And then when you look at the bottom, it's teacher quality, it's accountability, it's anything that is an academic or curricular improvement, and it's school choice. On post-secondary, again, what's right at the top is hybrid learning. Then we've got basic needs, we've got workforce development. And then at the bottom, interestingly, because I know some members are working on this, we've got post-secondary access for incarcerated individuals, and then also contributing to strong labor markets for completers in post-secondary. So making sure that people don't get out of college and become unemployed. Racial justice. So resource equity rises right to the top. Cultural awareness and implicit bias training with the caveats I mentioned. Diversifying the educator workforce. Some things that are less pressing among our members, again, as we think about, what should we be topic of racial justice? What more, education could we be offering for our members or connections to other programs? Then lower on the list is culturally inclusive curriculum, eliminating police presence in schools, and renewed school desegregation efforts. And then last one, we see this question of philanthropy itself. So certainly interested in supporting policy and advocacy efforts aimed at increasing funding, shifting strategy to be about social and racial justice, less interest, I guess, in greater accountability and transparency in philanthropy or reparations. So I see some questions coming in. I want to make sure I'm covering those, and then I'll say a couple of words myself. And people can feel free to just unmute themselves to ask questions as well.
Celine, you mentioned you're an educator and that you have that experience and practice. And I guess I was curious about the demographics of the funders and what percentage of those respondents have practice in education, both as educators or scholars or combinations thereof? Like who's been in practice?
Yes, this is the hard part about delivering survey results is you always have to say there are questions we didn't ask, and that's a question we didn't ask. I think it's a really important one. I think it's a really interesting one, but I don't know the answer to that. So as I said, to me, this is a really important synthesis of what we're seeing in, what I was seeing in kind of one-off conversations. So what it allows us to do, number one, is set some direction. So when you hear lots of members talking about racial justice, for example, one of the things that's really important for an organization like us to do is say, what are the things what are the most important pieces of that racial justice puzzle? Where do we think we could bring members together? Where do we think we could, connect members to resources, connect members to each other? And so what you see in that last list is, a rough sense of, what are the things that are the top priorities? How would members define racial justice? And so to me, that's a really important kind of listening tool. Then I want to talk a little bit about my surprises. So I think right now, and I do know that there are some pieces of information that have come in very recently that have been saying maybe revenue hasn't been down quite as much in 2020 as we thought. Maybe 2021 in terms of school budgets won't be quite as catastrophic as we thought. But I would have, if I had taken the survey, I would have put resource equity in K-12 as my number one issue. And so I was really validated that that ended up being our members' number one issue. in my prior life at Teach Plus, running a network of teachers, I constantly said, don't just ask for more money. We have to be more thoughtful than that in what we're advocating for. This might, in my mind, be the moment where we need to be really in there fighting for more money in the next stimulus and beyond. So that was surprising, but in a real validating way. Another thing that was surprising in a really positive way is I had heard lots of diffuse conversation within our network about hybrid learning, but I think the way that it shows up in this survey is much more strong and conclusive in the direction of, really there's an important role for philanthropy to play in the future of hybrid learning and helping to build that future now, as at the post-secondary level and at the K-12 level. So to me, I think that's a really kind of exciting and invigorating finding. And then I'll just say, those issues, teacher quality, charter schools, accountability, anything that has to do with academics and curriculum, the fact that those fall low on the list in most cases is something that's a little heartbreaking to me. Those are more my areas of expertise, and I think that it's going to be really important as we move into a Biden administration, which probably is going to draw some lessons from the Obama administration and their work on education policy, that we take a moment to really reflect on what did we learn that's creating such strong reactions in some of our membership. I've heard lots of different explanations for why funders have moved away from those issues. And I really do think that taking a beat and thinking about those things and trying to draw some conclusions that are going to lead us to focus on this, not this, is going to be really important. So those really point up in my mind some of where we'll be headed in 2021. And now we're just on to questions. I've talked a ton.
Dr. Coggins, I have a question about you spoke specifically about incarcerated youth and re-engagement. And at the Center for the Transformation of Schools at UCLA, we're actually doing a report specifically on juvenile schools under the Los Angeles County Office of Education. And earlier you spoke about trauma and forced learning. I'm curious, and this goes into more of the systemic, but what we're kind of seeing is the ways in which this system is truly enforcing trauma. So in a sense, when we speak about racial justice, what is a way that we can work on, in a sense, uprooting such a system like our juvenile court systems to where these students can have proper needs and resources in place so they could actually re-engage in society? Because when we've spoken to the design committee of this new model, this new project-based learning model that they implemented about 10 years ago, re-engagement is in a sense a utopian decision that they think about later on, because they're still focused on much more immediate issues that are inside the camps as of now.
Mm-hmm. So, I think this is a place where, and I do know and have spoken with many members, I think one of the areas that I have learned the most in my couple of years at GFE is about incarcerated youth and the interrelationship between the criminal justice system and the education system. What I think we pick up when we do averages in a survey is, the fact that there are some members who are very interested in this issue, who are investing heavily, who are, can be in the foreground of a learning agenda for GFE, where we engage other members on the topic. But what became clear is that there weren't lots of members who were seeing this as central. Another thing that I'll say is what this does is pushes me to think about how do we partner with other organizations, because part of this is an education question and part of this is a criminal justice question. And so this is a place where, I would see us thinking more about partnership than saying, this is the core of the GFE agenda. But thank you for contributing. I think there's, I learned from just your short comments and think there's just so much more to be done there. I have another question in the chat, which is, do respondents see philanthropies as leaders, supporters, or something else in developing these solutions? That's a great question. I think that, this is I think this is an ongoing conversation within philanthropy. What I have seen in my time in philanthropy is a real intentionality among funders to try to be more in partnership, to recognize the wisdom of more proximate leaders to the issues that they are seeking to offer support on. A recognition that in some cases, funders have disproportionate power, and trying to kind of step back from that. But that's intention, right? Because at the same time, funders want to see change come from their investment, and they have a theory of action behind their giving. And so I think that there's the response to that question is going to end up being mixed. We did not ask that question specifically, but I think it's, we're a field that is trying to evolve, and part of trying to evolve is not saying we're the leaders in everything. I'm seeing John Garcia maybe made a comment on this, or I'm trying to read it as a question as I go.
I'm going to just say it. So,
yeah, do it.
Sorry, I wrote a lot in there. No, I'm just saying that it seems that there's been a real evolution around issues of kind of racial justice and equity, and how folks have prioritized their work moving forward because of that. I mean, I kind of put in there, it'd be great to know how foundations work in this space has really evolved their thinking around this. And we have seemingly moved from the way we talk about this work from reform to equity as a field, right? And so, I'm just wondering how much that shaped a lot of people's areas of emphasis and funding.
I think that's fair. And then I think because you've popped yourself in, John, I'll say the next question is about, number one, is this a survey of all funders? And the answer is yes. But I would also say we have many members like John at the Greater LA Fund, Education Fund, that both raise money and give money. And so we have people who are a little bit closer to the practitioner side. And then we have those who are firmly in the giving space. So is there any data about how these priorities align and compare with the views of those in the field? I've been reflecting a lot on this as I've seen other pieces of research come out. So for example, Bellwether Education Partners just did a survey of parents, and the survey of parents showed that parents are increasingly interested in and wanting school choice. So that's directly at odds with a lot of our funders saying, we don't want to support school choice. Of course, their school choice can exist without philanthropy being involved, but there are places where we see some gaps. I think there are also some gaps. If you ask school people right now about the future of hybrid learning, they might say, we're somewhat underwater with the current of hybrid learning, and the real challenges of there are places in the country, many places in the country that don't have broadband and all of that. Karen Kalish has a question. Karen, unmute yourself.
I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of my funding is in the area of parent and family engagement. And if there's thousands of the kids in my region, I'm in St. Louis, and in the country, millions, who are coming to school their very first day, already 1 and 2 years behind, because there was little to no reading, talking, playing, singing at home. So this part of parent and family engagement seems to touch all of your 5 areas in some sense or another. It's in K through 12, although we're starting earlier. If they do come on that very first day, and you mentioned Pedro, who I just adore, and he was one of my professors at Harvard. He says, when you come to school like that on that first day, and you don't know your shapes, your colors, your letters, how to write your name, and he uses these words, the game is over. Those 4 words, over and over. So it seems, and then the kids go into the criminal justice system, which you keep talking about so wisely. But it's so this parent and family engagement, I don't see it anywhere. I haven't heard the word parent very often in this conversation. And I guess when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so this parent and family engagement seems so important, but I don't see it here.
So I pulled back up a slide that, So when we did those composite, so it's third on the list in civic education and students. So parent and community engagement. Basically, the response set that we saw was the standard response set, if you will. Did not jump off the page for any unusual story. There were a lot of those issue areas that came up as philanthropy is very needed. There's a little bit of opportunity, but not a ton. And we see some urgency, but not a ton. And so again, these are averages. It does not, it clearly some people care a lot about it. But it was one of the ones that was hard for us to do anything more than to say philanthropy cares about this, but in a way that our survey doesn't pick up anything kind of more than the average.
I just want to make one more point about it. When
Yeah.
pie chart that I've seen that shows that in America, our public school kids are only in their school building 14% of their entire year. That's not academic, that's walk in and walk out. That's
Yeah.
gym and lunch and everything else. And approximately, we hope 33% sleeping, 8 hours a day for 365 days. But that leaves 53% out of school, not sleeping all summer, every Saturday, every Sunday. And if nothing's going on there, according to Pedro also, the
Yeah.
kids aren't going to make it.
Yeah.
So it's not just parent and family engagement right here in school and in policy, it's really even before that, because those little brains get formed
Mm-hmm.
in early. And if they
Yeah.
don't have their little brains formed and the neurons and the pathways, they're not going to be able to learn.
Yeah. So both of those, the out of school time really did come up for funders, as funders have a really important and unique role to play at kind of steady state. And then birth to 5, there is some opportunity that people see right now, I think, because of the decimation of the whole pre-K workforce in this moment. So, so that's the most that I can say coming out of the data, but I think those are really important points. And again, like whenever you show averages in survey data, there are people who are like, I put a 5 for that on a scale of 1 to 5. And so I get it. This is very helpful commentary. Eric Garrett is next.
Hi, this is a terrific piece of work. I think it's very valuable, and I recognize it was a lot of work. I wonder, though,
Love to doing it.
I wonder if it could be made even more valuable and more work by rewording this survey slightly and giving it to the end beneficiaries of our grants, i.e. the school districts and post-secondary institutions that our grantees are working with, and asking them basically the same questions, slightly reworded, to see if there is coherence between funders and the end beneficiaries and where there are disconnects. I think that might provide a lot of illuminative information.
I love that, Eric. I think that you and I should have a conversation, but others who are interested in this should have a conversation, because we would need help getting to the end users. We as GFE don't have a constituency or leverage with them. But I'm trying my best to, as I mentioned with that bellwether one on choice, like track, how does what our members are saying track with other parts of the public, be it parents or educators. And I would love to do that. I think that would be fantastic.
I can't speak for other funders, but I know that working with our grantees, we could definitely get to their beneficiaries.
Yeah, great. I mean, and so we're happy to partner and share the questions, and that would be great. So let's talk about that, and that's an open invitation to everyone. Janice is next. Lombardo.
Hi, Celine.
I left it up for you, Janice.
Thank you. Thank you. So I know you've been thinking a lot and doing a lot of work around civic education, partly because I know we've had a lot of conversations around it in the last year or so.
Yeah.
And so, when I initially saw the percentages, of course, I was really disappointed. Although, as I read the question, of course, these are all really important themes. And if you're trying to pick one of them, I totally understand why this is not the number one. given that it's not most people's background, it's not most people's funding, right? I mean, the field is looking for more funding, and but seeing this slide is a little more heartening, seeing that, over the percentages, 50% or more agree that philanthropy is highly essential. That's really encouraging. And I guess my question, I'm coming specifically from the civic ed space, but I think maybe for the other four themes that didn't sort of rise to the very top, I'm just wondering how you and GFE are thinking about moving forward or not with the ones that didn't sort of, rise to the top. So obviously racial justice and education is number one, but obviously there are things to do in the other four. So sort of what is the future of those themes, and will some kind of get left by the wayside, or is there an opportunity for GFE and some of its members to move forward and thinking through some of these other themes and what we can do about them?
Yeah, so I think you're right. So we picked those 5 themes because those are the 5 most important themes to our members. There could have been many more themes, and you'll also see, Janice, you kind of pointed this out, that there's a lot of overlap. Like we made these categories so that we could try to do some sense making, but there are simple arguments that anyone could make, that there's something from racial justice that should go in civic ed, and there's something from K-12 that should be in racial justice. Totally correct on that. These are not the correct categories. They're our best shot at categories. So I would say, in my mind, it really is about partnership and prioritization. So on a lot of the civic issues, we've done partnership with PACE, which is a collaborative of funders in the civic education space. We've done partnership with the new name of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, Raj Vinakoda's shop. And so I would picture us doing more in, like that. I also would, this for me is a quick sheet to be able to, as I talk with members, and I hold myself accountable for meeting members' needs, to just be checking back and saying, which are these things that really jumped off the page in terms of high levels of interest and kind of urgency among members. So, and unfortunately, in a lot of these, they came to a middle, like people saying, as we talked about with parent engagement, really important for philanthropy to be involved, pretty urgent and there's some opportunity, but there's nothing that that clearly distinguishes it from some of the other things we asked about. Any other questions? All right, so hold on one second. I'm reading the question. Okay, so part of forming student brains is to provide learning experiences that resonate, culturally relevant curriculum, and are inspiring, so not police in schools. How do we create urgency here? How do we begin to see racial justice as the opportunity to create education systems that look different from what we know? So I'm going to take this as mostly a racial justice question. To me, I would urge a member to look at this survey the way that we tried to map it out and say, is this an issue that's a home run right now that I should be, that we're working on at our foundation, and we want to connect to GFE to make sure we're engaging as many other funders as possible to build as strong a coalition as possible, because now is the moment. So on some things that have to do with the racial justice agenda, like diversifying the educator workforce, like resource equity, those things, they're just tremendous opportunity and tremendous appetite among funders. Then I think there are some other things, like if you're interested in school desegregation efforts, this was one that was kind of heartbreaking to me. I was surprised, although, in some ways not surprised. If that's an issue that you're interested in, come to me and say, we'd love to do a session on this, because we're working in the state of Nevada on this, and funders probably don't know about these promising things that are happening. So in my mind, where you see a lack of some caution is a place for learning. And so in my mind, what we're trying to do is create different tracks that are appropriate to the issue, and then allow members to kind of lead and pull in other members as appropriate. Did we see anything mentioned about learning science? No. Yes, I think it's incredibly important, and obviously tracks very deeply with social and emotional learning, but is separate. So I'm sorry, no, it's not in this one. It should be, but so should about 50 other topics that ended up getting cut. Okay, so I think we're at time, and really appreciate the conversation. And I would just say to you all, please look forward to being engaged in some deeper work around these different topics in the coming year. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.